In early May of this year, one of the world's richest and most powerful democracies took an unprecedented step to constrain and control one of its largest political parties. In the wake of a hotly contested election, the German government in Berlin moved against the Alternative for Deutschland, a hard-right party and political movement that has surged to prominence over the last several years. According to German domestic intelligence, the Alternative for Deutschland, better known as the AfD, was an extremist organization, quote, incompatible with the free democratic order. Under German law, it could very well be banned, and Germany's leaders appeared on track to do precisely that. But not even a week later, after intense domestic and international outcry, Berlin reversed its decision in advance of a court battle that's sure to get exceptionally nasty. For many in Germany and across the globe, the overreach was obvious. But even among those who may have been sympathetic to arguments that the AfD should be curtailed, a larger question still remained. How could Germany, a country claiming to be a world-leading free and fair democracy, justify taking such harsh action against a party with over 10 million German supporters? How does a nation that claims to be led by the will of its people get to a point where it's openly discussing the ban of a party that 1 in 5 of its people stand behind? And even if Germany's concerns about the AfD were perfectly well-founded, was Berlin wrong to do what it did? Alright, before we can dive into the tough questions around Germany's AfD, we've got to set the scene, starting with Germany's nationwide elections this past February. Ahead of the vote, German political leaders were reckoning with a few difficult and frustrating past few years under the now former Chancellor Olaf Scholz. Scholz is a member of the left-leaning pro-European party, the Social Democrats, and since he came to power in 2021, we could say politely that Scholz underdelivered. Domestically presided over a stagnant economy at a time when German industry was downsizing, long-term fiscal problems were rearing their ugly heads, and a flood of refugees led to spiking social tensions and a national reckoning on immigration. On the world stage, Germany turned out not to rise to the occasion and be a true continental leader in pushing back against the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and Scholz proved ineffective in guarding the strength of Germany's export industry as China gained power. Suffice it to say, 2025 was going to be a change election. And a bit of a spoiler here, Scholz came out with just barely 3/5 of the support he'd gotten in 2021, losing his party a full 86 seats in the German Bundestag. And as Germans have gone looking for change, the AfD has come to deliver. The party is a recent arrival on the German political scene, formed in 2013 out of a right-wing resistance to the policies of longtime Chancellor Angela Merkel. In 2017, the AfD put up a strong showing in the nation's federal election, going from 0 to 94 seats in the Bundestag and nearly tripling the support that it had gotten in 2013. In 2021, after Merkel stepped aside, the AfD lost a few seats, but after that election led Germany into the Scholz years, the AfD's appeal grew and grew. It's especially strong in the former communist East Germany, seizing on long-term issues around national reintegration, and it's gathered a full 15 seats in the European Parliament. But despite the growing support for the AfD, the party's reception in Germany has been far from that of a rising star. Instead, they've drawn skepticism, outrage, and outright condemnation from the established parties of the German government, as well as the governments and publics of many other European Union nations. The reasoning's largely down to the AfD's ideology, a hard-right, nationalist movement that has taken strong stances against immigration, against the European Union, and against the religion of Islam, among other things. The movement has strong ethno-nationalist elements. Its leaders and supporters have engaged in various sorts of historical revision and Holocaust denial, and it's framed Germany's wave of recent immigrants, especially Muslims, as a foreign invasion that threatens German national identity. Those are views that would be controversial in most European democracies. But in Germany, the AfD and its ideology are treated with an entirely different level of severity. At the heart of that treatment is Germany's painful legacy of radical and far-right rule, particularly its time under the Nazi Party before and during World War II. For generations, German leaders have bent over backward to demonstrate both to their own people and to the rest of the world that far-right ideals and political movements are the precise opposite of Germany's modern ideals. The nation's non-hard-right political parties have diligently maintained a so-called firewall since the post-war years, refusing to involve the far-right in matters of German governance, even if they're elected to seats in the Bundestag. Other parties don't form coalitions with them, they don't put forward any bills that would require their vote, and they don't collaborate with them, period. So when the AfD surged to its greatest electoral victory ever in 2025, it was no surprise that the avatars of modern German politics reacted with outrage. the AfD won a full 20.8% of the popular vote and increased its share of seats in the Bundestag to 152, nearly doubling its prior count. The only party to get a larger share of the vote, the centre-right CDU/CSU, picked up 208 seats, and its leader Friedrich Merz was elected as Germany's newest chancellor. That, too, was a problem for much of Germany's political leadership, since Merz himself has passed a motion in early 2025 that only got through because it gained support from the AfD, meaning that Merz had personally breached the decades-long firewall against the AfD and its predecessors. The firewall was showing signs that it could break. The German electorate seemed to be embracing a hard-right party at rates not seen in decades. Making matters worse for Germany's longtime ruling parties, the AfD's newfound support came largely from young voters, while the party itself demonstrated a social media and messaging strategy that Germany's elder statesmen had little hope to match. By all outward indicators, the AfD and its hardline ideology had proven that they're here to stay, and that a moment eerily reminiscent of Germany's old Nazi party had broken through to prominence yet again. When we look at what came next, timing mattered. The decision that German domestic intelligence made about the AfD came on the 2nd of May 2025. Incoming Chancellor Merz was, at that time, still 4 days away from taking office, meaning that it was still Olaf Scholz and his Social Democrats, not Merz and his new ruling coalition, that was in charge of the nation. Of course, it's no surprise to viewers around the world that outgoing political leaders sometimes throw caution to the wind as they walk out of the door. Just take former US President Joe Biden's pardons of his family members in his final days in office, or his predecessor Donald Trump attempting to challenge the outcome of the 2020 election. But in Germany's case, it was the nation's domestic intelligence service that chose to act, designating the AfD as a right-wing extremist organization at the behest of a German federal office charged with protecting the constitution. The agency laid out its rationale succinctly for Germany and its people to hear. According to German intelligence, the AfD was dangerous because, quote, the ethnicity and ancestry-based understanding of the people prevailing within the party is incompatible with the free democratic order. That is to say, the AfD's leaders were advocating a political ideology that went against freedom and democracy. Specifically, German intelligence alleged that the AfD doesn't consider some German citizens to be equal members of German society if they come from a, quote, migration background from predominantly Muslim countries. As they laid out, the AfD's ideology, quote, devalues entire segments of the population in Germany and violates their human dignity. The agency produced an 1,100-page report on the AfD, drawing on years of constant monitoring and tracking, and drawing on a range of specific examples: AfD lawmakers denigrating Muslims, using Nazi slogans and symbolism, defending Nazi officials and their actions, and in a few cases, having ties to a recent plot to overthrow the German government. With the AfD now designated an extremist organization, German domestic intelligence would be empowered to recruit informants and investigate the group further, intercept and analyze its communications, and otherwise monitor it to ensure that it doesn't pose an existential threat to German democracy. But once the decision was handed down, the backlash began nearly immediately. The AfD's joint leaders, Alice Weidel and Tino Trapala, derided it as a, quote, severe blow to German democracy, while the party's deputy chairman referred to the decision as, quote, complete nonsense. Weidel accused the nation's outgoing government of using German intelligence as a, quote, secret justice system to prevent the AfD from realizing its destiny, and the party vowed a fierce legal fight to overturn the decision. And perhaps to the chagrin of the Scholz government, the AfD weren't the only prominent German politicians to express their disapproval. While Germany's incoming chancellor didn't state outright that he would oppose the decision, he voiced his opposition to a ban on the AfD within hours of taking office, arguing that banning the party would do nothing to address the concerns of its voters. Merz's new interior minister told German News that he doubted that the intelligence findings on the AfD would meet the high standards that Germany has established for a political party to ever be banned. Nor was the criticism of Germany's decision constrained to Germany itself. In the United States, high-level figures within Washington's right-wing government rallied against the designation, with Secretary of State Marco Rubio insisting that it be reversed and calling the action, quote, tyranny in disguise. Vice President J.D. Vance accused German bureaucracy of ideologically rebuilding the Berlin Wall, while centre-billionaire political advisor Elon Musk stated online that, quote, banning the centrist AfD, Germany's most popular party, would be an extreme attack on democracy. Officials from Italy's right-wing government expressed similar sentiments, as did Hungarian leader Viktor Orban. Across the European far right, leaders that aren't currently in power tended to stay quiet on the issue, including Marine Le Pen of France, Nigel Farage of the UK, and Geert Wilders of the Netherlands, perhaps because their own political movements don't have the requisite power to prevent their nations from following Germany's example. But those staunchly right-wing leaders that do exert control over their national governments came out to voice a near unanimous outrage. That anger wasn't just targeted at the decision to classify the AfD as extremist. Instead, some of the fiercest opposition was directed against the German government's likely next step, banning the AfD outright via Germany's constitutional court. That's something that Germany has only ever done to political parties twice since its constitution was ratified, and never against a party anywhere near the prominence of the AfD today. To institute a ban, German officials would have to prove that the AfD is working directly to undermine or overthrow German democracy, an intentionally high bar and one that German intelligence may struggle to meet unless its new authority to investigate the AfD led to some absolutely seismic findings. But even if a ban didn't go into effect anytime soon, Germany could dismiss civil servants who were found to be extremist, and a growing stigma could harm the party because of the magnitude of the problems implied by Germany even trying to ban it. Now, all of this isn't to say that the idea of monitoring the AfD or even banning it outright doesn't draw support in Germany. In early May, a survey revealed that 61% of Germans agreed with the decision to classify the AfD as extremist, and that 48% would even support an outright ban. Just a bit over 1 in 3 Germans would oppose a ban if it was handed down. Numerous German politicians who've campaigned on the idea of legal action against the AfD have been re-elected to their posts, and it's important to emphasize that despite the fact that the party is on the rise, it's still only pooled about 20% support in its best ever election showing, and doesn't appear to draw more than 25% support nationwide at any given time. Nor is it new for the AfD to be embroiled in messy legal proceedings. Indeed, German intelligence was only able to designate the group as extremist after the AfD lost a prior court case in 2024, objecting to the fact that it had been classified back then as an entity suspected of extremism. The AfD was already classified as an extremist organization on a regional level in the 3 German states where it is at its most popular, before the classification was extended to the whole party. The AfD also disbanded its youth wing in 2023 after a decision that found it was extremist, and many of its elected representatives, including the highly influential regional leader Björn Höcke, have been convicted in the German court system. And Germany's leaders have defended their case before the public. After the intense backlash against the decision of its intelligence agency, Germany's Foreign Office insisted publicly that the decision was democratic and that Germans had, quote, learned from our history that right-wing extremism needs to be stopped. Many German political leaders voiced support for the idea that the AfD is a special case and needs special treatment, while others defended German intelligence, asserting that the decision was made on the merits and was not influenced by political bias one way or the other. But in the end, it took very little time for the decision of German domestic intelligence to be put on ice. On the same day that he was sworn in, Merz had indicated that his new government would pore over the report on the AfD and potentially reconsider it, and it didn't take half a week for the decision to be suspended. On May the 8th, just 2 days after Merz took power, the extremist designation was paused indefinitely, ostensibly in order to clear the way for a court decision in the city of Cologne, where German domestic intelligence is headquartered. As of now, there is no clear indication of when or if the designation will be reinstated, and the Merz coalition does not appear inclined to fight on behalf of the reinstatement. Certainly, the political will to push hard for a ban doesn't currently appear to be there. We lay out the story of the AfD's extremist designation and that designation's rapid reversal for the time being for 2 reasons. First, it's an interesting story, and we here at Political Fronts, we like interesting stories. And clearly, so do you, so thank you for subscribing. But the second reason is because the case of the AfD raises a much larger series of questions about what it means to be part of a free and fair democracy. Yes, one particular nation with one particular history is making one particular decision deal with one particular political party. But the cycle that's played out in Germany is the same cycle that's played out across the globe. A far-right populist movement rises, a political establishment panics, and whether or not anything comes of it, a debate over whether to take drastic action consistently comes next. Germany is unique in that the nation's legal system chose, if even for the briefest moment, to take direct, unilateral action against a group that it had classified as a threat. But the AfD in Germany could just as easily have been MAGA Republicans in the United States, or the National Rally in France, the Reform Party in the UK, Vox in Spain, Chega in Portugal, the Brothers of Italy in Italy, or any other of these hard-right parties that have risen to prominence. Every single political establishment in each of those respective nations had the option to try and do the same thing Germany did, but all of them decided against it. So did Germany just do what had to be done when no other nation would, or did Germany make a massive mistake and attack the basis of its very own democracy? Well, we can answer the big question by answering several more targeted ones in sequence. First, was German domestic intelligence even accurate in its assessment of the AfD by calling it an extremist group in the first place? Now, certainly the group does engage in conduct that the German government has characterized as extreme. It does indeed regularly demagogue against migrants, specifically Muslims, and its members and leaders do indeed seem to intermittently endorse and utilize Nazi-era slogans, symbology, and at times ideological points. As for whether those acts are extremist in nature, we imagine that any person watching this episode already knows where they stand on that question, and so do the people of Germany. But even in a free and fair democracy, the question of what counts as extreme isn't a matter of public referendum, and it certainly isn't decided by a government trying to just replicate the prevailing public opinion at a given time. It's up to the German government to decide an official, legal classification of extremism, and if Germany's government or its people want to change that definition, there's a preordained official process to do so. So, is the German government within its legal right to compile a list of actions and statements by a political party and lay out a case that its evidence shows that its target is extremist? Well, on that count, the answer's yes, just as it's well within the AfD's legal right to dispute that classification, engage in a legal battle, and go through the courts to find a resolution. But the much stickier issue is whether the German government should have levied the allegation at the AfD. After all, I could convert this YouTube empire into a multi-level marketing scheme to sell patented scalp-optimized razor technology, but that doesn't mean it's a good idea for me to do that. For Germany's case, there are a couple of questions to consider. Should the German government have done what it did, and should the Scholz government have done what it did? On the latter question, regarding the Scholz government specifically, this was probably a strategic miss on their part. On the one hand, taking any major action like this during a lame duck period immediately carries the connotations of shady business, or business that a political leader is only engaged in because they won't have to face the consequences. That problem is all the greater because by the numbers, investigations into the AfD should be a relatively popular step in Germany, but they're now tinged by the fact that this extremist designation is a last gasp action of an unpopular leader after an election where the AfD performed better than Scholz's own political party. And on the other hand, even if this was a move by the Scholz government to either covertly clear the way for his successor or force his successor to act, it seems to have backfired. Chancellor Merz himself made points to that effect, pointing out that a simple ban of the AfD would deny or ignore the larger problems that make the AfD appealing to voters. Quoting Merz here, 10 million AfD voters, you can't ban them. You have to engage with them factually and on substance. And I want to do everything in this federal government to help people regain trust in the political center so they no longer feel the need to vote for the AfD. Said Merz's new interior minister, quoting again, the AfD does not need to be banned. It needs to be governed away. And we need to talk about the issues that have made the AfD so big. Both Merz and his interior minister are getting at the broader problem in Germany that neither investigations nor an eventual ban of the AfD would be able to address. The AfD isn't popular in Germany just because it's got a cool acronym for a name or because Alice Weidel is simply the coolest dude in Dresden. It's popular because massive numbers of Germans genuinely support it, some because they agree with everything the party's leaders have to say, but many others because the status quo in Germany has delivered poor returns across much of the nation. Young people in particular flock to the AfD because they believe Germany's ruling parties have failed them and because the AfD's social media operations can harness a deep resentment toward political leaders over the country's future and the future of its people. The party is also powerful in former areas of East Germany, where a largely rural population is under intense economic pressure that the government has failed to alleviate. Certainly those frustrations are couched in the AfD's xenophobia, its rage against migrants, its nationalist ideals, and yes, its leaders' apparent fondness for a very specific period in German history. But to dismiss the real anger and frustration driving the AfD's popularity because of the way that anger and frustration manifests itself is to completely miss the point. Investigate and ban the AfD without addressing any of those other issues, and the German government might as well form a replacement opposition party on the people's behalf. In that world, anger against the status quo is going nowhere, and Germany's new government knows it. Deal with the problems that have caused the AfD to become so successful, and it might lose its potency. But to fail so many people and then ban the party they consider to be their voice is the precise opposite of a solution. And with that, we can take on the ultimate question. Should the German government, no matter who led it at the time, take steps to eliminate a major political party? And if it does, then how can Germany look at itself with a straight face and call itself a democracy? In a strategic sense, even though Germany does grant itself the power to ban political parties and has done so in the past, it probably missed its opportunity some time ago. As we've stated, in the two prior instances that modern Germany banned political parties, those parties were far smaller and drew far less political support than today's AfD. Pinpointing a time when it would have made political and strategic sense to ban the AfD is pretty difficult. It was a somewhat softer and more politically ambiguous party when it first got started, and only really took on this ideological slant after it picked up steam. But at the very least, a more fitting time to try for a ban might have been after, say, the 2021 election, when the AfD seemed to be losing a bit of steam. To do it now, after the party captured its largest vote share ever and won nearly a quarter of the Bundestag, is exceptionally bad timing, especially when, again, the outgoing government making the decision lost to the AfD in the polls. In truth, that might be the biggest problem of all. Even if you, as a viewer, might agree with the general idea that governments should be able to ban political parties that pose a proven, extreme threat to the nation itself, there is a world of difference between banning a fringe political party with minimal support and banning a party that, like it or not, has already become mainstream. Investigating and then banning any political party would raise difficult questions around ideas of freedom, representation, and democracy. But if the political party in question earns just a fraction of a percent of the national vote share, then those difficult questions are kept mostly academic. The same simply cannot be said for a party that has already risen to prominence and that draws the support of a large and growing proportion of society. German domestic intelligence justified its decision to designate the AfD as an extremist organization by making the case that the AfD was a threat to German democracy. But even if we take every sentence, every word, every letter of the 1,100-page report on AfD extremism to be accurate, even if we treat it with deadly seriousness, we still have to ask a second question that the report against the AfD never addressed. What's more harmful to democracy? Allowing a virulent, hateful, xenophobic, Nazi-flirtatious political party to remain a part of the German political system, or unilaterally violating the will of the German people by investigating and possibly banning a party that has become a major player in German domestic politics? One option, the option to meet the AfD in the political arena and defeat it by doing better for the German people, could backfire and let the far right take power. But it doesn't have to. The other, the option to investigate and attempt to ban the AfD, will violate the very foundation of democratic governance and further alienate a major portion of the electorate that already distrusts Berlin without addressing any of the problems that led to the AfD in the first place. There is no doubt that Germany's government, both under Olaf Scholz and now under Friedrich Merz, sees itself between a rock and a hard place. But even in a situation where every option sucks, some outcomes are still substantially better than others, and taking the action that it took against the AfD in the way that it did does not appear to have been a wise choice. Germany's new government, they seem to agree, at least for now, but let's see how this all plays out, shall we? Thank you for watching.